Yes.
Last night came to me so softly he came and we went to the top. And laid his hand on me and seemed to say,
It was a strange night that night. My sister stared at the sable face of the young man in the torn, burned orange flight suit. It had been a hot, humid August in Hawaii, on the base. We had all lived in the house for 2 months, not even on that hot August night. But strange goings-ons had happened since we had moved in. Every morning we woke up to find every kitchen drawer open, every cabinet door open. Sometimes food left on the countertops. But now as my sister looked onto the visage of the young African American standing before her that she could see through, she knew it was not a case for the military police, my sister being a sensitive. She said that he had an inquisitive and confused look on his face. She didn't know why. My father was at work doing the 12 to midnight shift over at the communications center. After a while, he disappeared. She came to awake my mother, the queen of light sleepers of all the planet Earth. But she couldn't rouse her. She could not rouse me or my brother. She went back into the living room, and there he stood again, being able to look right through him. She could see his name patch on his flight suit, but couldn't make out the name. She called my father at the comm center and explained what had happened. Flash forward the next day to breakfast. My father was home from his watch. He had stopped by the housing office on the way by. "Oh," he said, "the person who lived in this house up until May of this year, 1965, was a young man by the name of Frankie Jones, he was known in his squadron. He was a helicopter crewman. He had died in Vietnam when his helicopter was hit by a bazooka round. But now he came back to find his family." My sister, not knowing what to do, turned to my mother. My mother, being of Sicilian descent, knew the ways of the spirit. The next day, at exactly 12:15 in the morning, he reappeared. This time, my sister was not the only one up, my mother was there. My father had told her who he was. "Frankie," she said, "Sergeant Jones, they're not here anymore. They moved back to Georgia, to your mother's house." He nodded, she said, approvingly and knowingly. What had happened to Frankie Jones? My father filled in. In those days in Vietnam, they didn't wear camouflage flight suits yet. They wore the old-fashioned orange ones. That's why he was wearing orange. He came back to find his family, to find out where they had gone. Now my mother had told him where they were. And we saw him no more. In our kitchen was left alone. Welcome to Ghost Tales from the Barn. As you well know, Reading is a place of many spirits. From here to Easton to Weston, from Branchville to Ridgefield, there are spirits. Perhaps, maybe your dog here in Reading has dug up a bone. Is it human? Is it an animal's? Has your dog, dear Rover, been to a shallow grave of some long departed 18th century personage from Reading? And with the sands of time blowing, and erosion and the rains have exposed something that Rover likes. My name is Joe Bonomo. I'm president of the Reading Historical Society, and I welcome you. I now have the privilege of turning over tonight's presentations to Ms. Amy Cabot and Ms. Cecilia Staunton.
I had no idea Joe could tell a story like that. That was really awesome. Thanks, Joe. So our original concept for this night was to put up feelers and get ghost stories, personal ghost stories, or ghost experiences from everybody in Reading, and have everybody come and share them. And we got 2. So we did some research, we collected some more ghost stories and some other information that I think you guys are going to like. It's just a good festive Halloween, kick off the Halloween season. I'll say that last night we were here putting up some of these lights, and our friend, does he have a name? Zalman. Okay, that's good. Okay. And we were standing around, Cecilia and Liz and I were standing around, and the wind is rushing. It's kind of spooky. We were saying, it's really kind of spooky here. It's a perfect place to tell ghost stories. I hope it's not haunted. And Cecilia said, well, you know, even inanimate objects can be haunted. And at that moment, the wine bottle flew off the table. I don't know if it's because we were drinking the wine, but that really happened last night. So I think it's a perfect setting to start this off. We're going to kick off the evening with Cecilia giving us a little short presentation on some of the historic graves in Reading. Cecilia,
Your bone. I actually do have a story about a bone. We live just a house away from an old cemetery on Cross Highway. And when we first moved here 10 years ago, my youngest was not quite 2, so he was about this big. And we all went trooping down, I have 3 boys, we all went trooping down to the cemetery to explore. And he came up to me holding a bone, just like this, a vertebrae. And we said, of course he didn't really talk yet. And I said, well, where did you get that? And we just kind of popped it back into a hole. So we don't know if it was it could have been a deer vertebrae, but you were in the cemetery. We were in the cemetery, I mean 50-50. So, all right, I just want to get situated here. Amy, are these yours? These? Look at these.
sure. Thanks.
Show of hands, how many of you have walked through any of the historic cemeteries or any cemetery in Reading? Yes? Nice. I've been doing it a lot lately. In preparation for this. And so, there are 7 historic cemeteries, graveyards, that are supposedly closed to new burials. and are historic graveyards. 6 of them are maintained by the town, and one of them is maintained by Christ Church. So, this one is the Great Pasture Cemeteries on, it's actually, I think, personally, it has some of the best preserved stones in it. And it's on Great Pasture Lane. This one you might be familiar with. This is the Christ Church, which I haven't actually been back in this churchyard since I was married in 1999. So today was the first day I was walking around, and that's a really interesting, it's a very interesting stone. This is on Lonetown Road, heading towards Bethel. Also, kind of one I've never stopped off and walked into, but passed many times and talked to. This kind of forlorn one is on Poverty Hollow. This is the ferry burial ground, and it was heavily vandalized in the 50s and 60s. And there's only a few headstones that are still kind of upright. There is a stone there with the names of who should be memorialized there. And interestingly enough, I have a headstone in my backyard that's a Perry or a fairy, and it's hard to read. And I wonder if that wasn't one of the, someone didn't take one of those stones from and bring it back. We haven't moved it, it's always been leaning against a tree in my backyard. This is the one I was talking about where we found the bone. This is on Cross Highway. It's the John Reed Sanford Cemetery, and I was told that this was their family plot, which would have been at the end of his original property. And there's lots of reeds in there at Sanford's, and there's lots of reeds in Sanford's everywhere, actually. So here we are back at the Great Pasture Cemetery, because I love this one. This one has some really nice early headstones. So focusing in on some of the headstones, you can see this one. It's pretty crudely carved, and at the time, people used the stone that they had locally. So you're not going to find the same style at every, all throughout New England. You're going to find variations. And this one is hard to read at the top. There may have been a motif at the top there, but you can definitely read the bottom, and you can see that the year he died was 1764 at 19 years of age.
On a windy day.
On a windy day. And I'd love to know what is up here. And there are probably ways to do that without touching the stone, which is something that I'm going to continue to look into. All right, so this one is at the Cross Highway at the Christ Church graveyard, and this skull and wings motif is very common. A lot of people think, oh, it's this, it's called memento mori. It's a reminder that you're going to die, and a lot of these early graves from the early colonial period have the skull and the wings, and also coffins on the side, hourglasses running out of time, sometimes an hourglass with wings. Time is flying, time is fleeting. But I've read some different things about this, and I think people assume that they kind of wanted to scare the living into being good Christians. But some scholars think it's actually to protect the deceased and to keep evil spirits away from the spirit of the person who died. What you also see are the cherub heads with wings. And This is a little less scary to modern eyes, but they were still pretty scary. But they were, these are really common too, and some people think, oh, at first they had the skull and crossbones, and then they kind of softened up and started, doing these, but they're really coexisted at the same time. So hard to say if people had the choice. If they want to say, oh, well, I'll take the skull and crossbones for mother, or no, I like the cherub and the wings. Or if it was up to the carver. This is an early sandstone one. It's in the Cross Highway, John Reed Cemetery. It's really worn down. It's kind of forlorn. It's leaning up against the stone wall. A lot of times people don't know what to do with a fallen stone, and they think they're helping by moving the stones over to the side, which in fact makes it impossible to know where that stone ever was to begin with. And you can see how weathered this is, and again, but you can still make out the skull and crossbones. And there's probably a way to decipher what it says with some clever photography. Here we are back at Great Pasture Lane. I love this one, not just because I think the simplicity of the craftsman is really apparent, but also for what it says. This a lot of times it's really fun to read some of these. This is Esther Barlow. She's the relict of Samuel Barlow, meaning she's the widow.
So he died first.
He died first. She's the widow, but instead of saying widow, she's the relict. She's been left behind. Sometimes men have the same epitaph, but usually it's a female. Then here is another one right behind it. Now this one was recently restored, and you can tell they actually, Historical Society had this removed and taken to a conservator who added this over here and has repaired cracks because this is splitting apart essentially in the middle. Those old slate ones tend to do that. This is Samuel Barlow, so Esther's husband. Probably done by the same artisan. You can tell there's very similarities in the carving. Here's Daniel Sanford, also cherub head and the wings. Same cemetery. Another skull. I wish these came. It's actually hard to take. I want to go back and try to take better photographs of these because maybe there's a way to kind of play with them a little bit so you can see what it says. Okay, so then moving forward, we have, moving forward into post-revolution, and things started to change a little bit with the new. One of these was a new fascination with classical architecture and art and ideas, Greek and Roman, and funerary symbolism changed and became classical. So we have urns, weeping willows, really, really popular motifs, and also the use of marble. Earlier artisans used softer stones, which were easier to carve. A lot of carvers traveled around, and they would just use what was on site. This is the Lone Town Cemetery. A lot of times people think these smaller stones are headstones, but in fact they are the footstones to the headstone. So usually people were placed with the epitaph facing east and the head like as if it was in a bed, and if it would rise up with the rising sun on the day of resurrection, which is a little creepy. So the footstone was kind of the foot of the bed, so to speak, so people were laid to rest. Sometimes they are children, but that's what these are right here. Those are pretty well preserved.
So they were pretty high cotton if they had both footstones and headstones.
Yeah, that was, I think, well, a lot of people had footstones, and you see a lot, when you walk around, you'll see a lot of the footstones are kind of
Knocked over.
around
Yeah.
or buried or on the ground, so they are there, but they just eroded. These stones tend to just disintegrate and become nubs. So here's another one. This one is in the pasture, a great pasture cemetery. I thought this one was interesting. I started to notice more of the symbols. This is clearly an urn on the top, but also a mason symbol below. So letting everyone know that's a mason. I thought this one was interesting too. I found another mason, which is over here, but then his wife really doesn't have nothing. Like, you can't think of something? Poor Lydia. Remember, she just did it all. This is Great on Cross Highway again. This is Captain John Reed and his wife. So, kind of important people for our town. This one, I don't know if anyone has any information on this, but this symbol up here this is at the Great Pasture Cemetery. There's a lot of stones with this symbol, and I looked through books, I could not figure out what that was.
Many times those symbols were the religious faith of the person buried.
Yeah, it just seems like an early stone for that.
Pastafari.
I found a few doubles. This one's a Great Pasture. And kind of begs the question, it's hard to read. You kind of assume they're a husband and wife, but it could have been two children or a brother and sister. It's hard to know. And then also, did they pass together? Here's another double. I love this one.
They both passed in the winter and they waited till spring to bury them.
It's true. Right. Death was around a lot. This one I love because it's so primitive looking. The faces are still looking at you. And I just like this one because it has lichens all over it. Does anyone have any questions or comments or things they would like to add?
What's the oldest stone that you found that you could read?
They're 1750s,
Which cemetery?
Great Pasture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't go though into, there's one in Umpqua that's not technically closed.
It's been there a long time too.
Yes, so there might be some good ones in there, and the two other cemeteries I didn't get to, one is on Marchant, and it's actually only got one grave.
Marchant.
It's Mr. Marchant.
Yeah.
And the other one is actually technically in Easton now, but it's on Sport Hill Road.
Right.
And I tried to get there today, but there was an accident blocking the road. And I just turned around. Here's more, weeping willows. Okay, so now if you go into any of these cemeteries, and I've done this, and I fully admit it, I have done grave rubbings, but I would not do that anymore. Because if a grave looks like it's preserved and it's really in good shape, it might not be internally, and so you're really damaging it when you touch it. So what you can do is use mirrors to try and bring out the relief in a stone. And I haven't tried this yet. I'm going to go try it. It's cool. Yeah, it looks cool. Definitely would work on ones that are leaning forward, or on a good. I think on a, obviously you couldn't have to do it on a sunny day, but that way you're not touching the stone. There's some other some other things you can do, but it all involves touching the stone, which is, at this point, not good for the stone. Anyway, that's it. Oh, and in the program, we have a program, there's some great websites and a great book that I found called Graven Images that was actually written in the 60s, but it was just excellent for symbolism on the stones for the colonial graves. So, if you're interested, thank you.
So-called abandoned cemeteries are governed by the state, Connecticut State General Statutes, Title 19A. Now, one of the reasons we are concerned about our cemeteries is that people come in and they say, oh, look at all the open space in that cemetery. You don't know if it's open space. Over the years, the limestone headstones wash away in the rain. Wooden ones rot away. Come along and say, oh, here's a plot, I will bury grandma there. You dig your shovel in, you find out you have dug up someone who was rescued. Now, there are certain beliefs with some people that, as innocent as though you may think, digging up a skull or a body is not a well-wishing thing. One of the things that we're working with the town of Reading is to do a GPR study of the historic cemeteries, to find out if indeed that is empty ground between those tombstones or a forgotten person of the past. So that is currently a proposal in the report that was done by myself, Mr. Sean McNamara, and my wife Janet, recently on the cemeteries, to recommend contracting for GPR services to find out who is there, and if they're still there. Now I'll turn it over to Amy.
All right, we get some more ghost stories. And I'm going to start off with my personal Reading ghost story. So, about 10 years ago, my husband Elliot and I fell in love with a house on Gallows Hill. It's one of the oldest houses in town. It was built in 1770. And we are only the fourth family to own it since 1770. It was built by Timothy Parsons and Elizabeth Couch, who are both buried in Upwad Cemetery. And some of their 10 children that were raised in this salt box house are buried in Upwad Cemetery too. So, you know, it's Gallows Hill and it's kind of creepy and it's old. But we're up for it. You know, we're up for it. So we move in, the house was uninhabitable. It didn't have a septic, the roof failed, there were snakes living in the attic, there were mice living in the basement, and we decide it's perfect. So we can't do everything all at once. So there's this piece of floor, it's about 3 feet wide and about 5 feet long, that connects one part of the house together, and it's just a piece of plywood. And I thought to myself, okay, we can't replace it right now, we can't do all the work right now, but maybe I'll just paint it to match the other floor that's real floor. That's nice old wide plank floor with like cool stuff chipped into it. So I get down on my hands and knees, and the thing's only about this wide, and I'm looking, I got the paint chips, it's plywood, it's blonde, you know, it's light color. I pick the color I want, I go to the paint store, I come back with the paint, and I go to start painting, and I see in black Sharpie on the floor, this floor was laid by Vincent Golombeschi in 1972. I laid the carpet in the back room. Big letters, fresh black Sharpie on the blonde plywood floor. I was on my hands and knees with paint chips. I did not see this. I laid the carpet in the back room in 1955, summer. Just thought you'd like to know, LSM. Lawrence Strong McCready had left that house in the land trust 3 years ago. It had been empty for 3 years. He was a rear admiral. He was a very well-respected and well-loved man about town. And I would like to think he gave me a personal message. And I would like to say thank you, Admiral McCready. I did not.
There it is.
There it is. Right, there it is, that's it. What happened, for real?
Admiral McCready was an admiral in the United States Merchant Marine Service. He was a master engineer, and he was also a former superintendent of the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point.
And a musician and an artist.
And an artist and a master marine engineer.
And I'm honored to be living in this house.
And we're going to have. Did you just paint over it after that?
Well, I can't save every ghostly message that I get.
She
So I
tried,
did paint over it, but I did take a picture of it, so this is actually it. This is the actual one.
she tried to donate it to the Reading Historical Society, but their facility isn't large enough to receive so many. But maybe with all your help tonight, they'll be able to expand, and keep such things.
So that's my personal story. If anybody has a story, I would love for you guys to just come on, chime in. Like, give us what you've got. If you have anything you'd like to share at any time, raise your hand. Come on, join us. We have a couple more things we're gonna give to you. So, Cecilia, while you're in practice of speaking,
Okay, my
Cecilia's
story.
got a Reading story.
Okay. My other Reading story. So I live in an old house as well, not as old, 1880 in Reading Center.
Okay.
And this is not my house, and this did not happen in my house.
Are you gonna say where?
I'm gonna say where, no,
I was thinking some people didn't come forward because of property value. I mean, to me, the property value was up when there's a ghost.
Yes, I think we have heard that from some people, that you don't wanna.
Yeah, because people have
Share
haunted.
their
It's
story?
like,
The owner of the house is not here, so I won't say exactly where it is, but it's in Reading Center, and it's a 1780 house, and it used to be owned by the town.
figure it out.
So when we hadn't moved into our house yet. This was a year before we actually moved to Reading, and I had someone from the house was for sale by the town. So I had seen the sign, and I called town hall, and they said, well, we'll leave it open for you tomorrow if you want to go in. And I said, okay, great. So I drove up here with my 3 boys, one of which I already said was even younger at the time, so a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. And the 2 younger ones fell asleep in the car. So we got to the house, and my 6-year-old and I walked into the house, and it was just a quiet day like this. Wasn't windy. It's a beautiful September afternoon. And we walked into the back kitchen and shut the door, and then walked to the front of the house and went into the parlor, and then came around to the front room, and everything was just pin drop quiet. And then suddenly I looked over to my right, and I realized how close that cemetery is to the house. And right when I was like, ooh, that's a deal breaker, I heard upstairs just slam! This door just shook the whole house. And I'm not kidding, I would have been out of there like a shot if my little guy hadn't, he goes, what was that? And I thought, well, I'm gonna man up here, or woman up here.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I said, is anyone here? You know? And we went upstairs, and there was not a single door shut. So, there was no, I would think, oh, there's suction in the house, but it wasn't a windy day. It was odd. Something didn't want us there, and so we left. It was too much work anyway, we didn't want to. So, the guy who lives there now, I told this story, and he swears that nothing's ever happened in the house, but I just don't think he's listening.
That's a good one. Do you have like 4 stories from that?
Yeah. Well, no, did you put those out?
Yeah. Maybe not.
Okay. So we printed off some stories from
Historyofwritingct.com.
Do you need a little more light to read?
No, I'm good. I'll
Yeah, they would.
Here, do you want this?
So, you know, I took two stories off of the history of Reading. All right, does anyone live in West Reading?
Yes.
Okay, this story is about West Reading. While driving in West Reading, keep an eye out for orbs and a ghostly lit tent. There are reports of orbs in a small field on the right of the train tracks before the overpass on Simpog Turnpike. Anyone? These sightings are usually at night. Glowing orbs of light and a tent illuminated from within then vanishes. Some explanations for these sightings have included a train worker who was killed in this location in the early 1900s, supposedly building from train tracks. This is also an area that has Native American connections, and according to the History of Reading website, there was a reburial of Indian remains in this area. Okay.
I also found one from Topstone, where this was from Haunted America. This was submitted by Anonymous, I don't know why, it would be Anonymous to talk about this, but a ghostly man by himself carrying a kayak toward a lake in Reading, it would be Topstone. He was gone when we moved the flashlight back there again. We walked up to the water just 20 feet away and there was no one. He just disappeared.
It's a pretty modern.
Right?
Yeah. It's like a millennial.
There are modern ghosts. There are modern ghosts. My daughter and her mother live in a house. In fact, the house is across the street from Mary Ann Guitar's house. Maybe some of you Historical Society know Mary Ann, since she is a historical figure in Reading. And I was sitting at my desk, which is in a back room in the house, and I saw somebody go down the stairs to the breezeway and jumped up and ran. Nobody there. And I said, "Oh, it was just my eyes, or ill-spent youth, or whatever." Then a few years later, my daughter, who was about 7 at the time, I was sitting in the living room on the couch, and she comes walking in, and she's surprising him on the couch. She said, "Daddy, I just saw you go outside with your vest on." And the guy that I had seen going down to the breezeway also had a vest on. So that house has only been there since 1951. Unlike Mary Ann's house, it's been there since was there since the at least 1867. So it doesn't take it to be an ancient haunting like the.
You can have a kayak.
Yeah, kayak. You can have a kayak. You can have, you know, a Vietnam War vet. That's not
Yes.
that long ago, is it? You
Yeah.
all remember Vietnam? Yeah. So anyway, so that's a little
That's
story
kind of
I
like that
had
one.
about
Do you
it.
have that one with the,
Black cap?
oh,
No, which one? Oh, this one.
yeah.
Okay. So in the Mark Twain Lane area, anyone on Mark Twain Lane?
I've walked a bunch.
There's supposedly a black cat appears somehow.
Oh, no. I think about the family that moves into the house.
Yes, the family, okay. So in the same area on Mark Twain Lane, a couple and their 2-year-old moved into an old homestead. And prior to the move, the 2-year-old has slept through the night, no problem. But for the first whole week in the new home, the 2-year-old does not sleep at night, but plays and laughs all night long. Which is creepy in itself.
Yeah.
Plus annoying, you know?
More than creepy.
So figuring the child needs to, you know, have a room that somewhat resembles their old house, they go and stay with her mother, so her husband has time to decorate. But while at the mother's house, the 2-year-old points to a painting on the wall and says, "Oh, what's she's doing here?" And the mother says, "What's who doing here?" And the 2-year-old says, I don't know if this is a real name, but Nadija. Nadija? She looks at a portrait of a child circa 1800s on the wall, and the 2-year-old says that that's the girl from the new house, and we play together. She comes out at night, and we have fun.
Okay. Well, I got one more from Putnam. No. Common Park, which was a Revolutionary War encampment. And it's saying that during the winter of 1778, 1779, several soldiers died and were buried on the site. And today there are reports of those who see the spirits of men walking up and down the trails. One of these stories concerns a place just off the main trail, which you've probably all walked, called Phillips Cave. Apparently, sometime after the winter of 1778-1779, one of these soldiers, his name was Phillips, wandered back to the place and lived alone there for a time in a cave among the tumbled rocks. He lived at first, as his old comrades had done, upon the game he could kill, and at last upon what pigs and poultry he could steal from the farmers in the area, probably the Morris, right? Probably the hills. The farmers of the region got together and decided to put a stop to it all, so one evening they waited for him outside the cave and shot him dead as he came out. And since that time there have been reports of the ghost of Phillips in and around the cave. Some claim to have even photographed him, and the story is so popular that at Halloween the park arranges ghost tours. They really do go.
So there's something to do for your holiday, because it is the big holiday of the year.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's too busy at Christmas.
All right, so we have, do I have? Yeah, do that.
So anyway, we have one more of these culled from the streets and lanes of old Reading. In 1980, the students at John Reed Middle School interviewed many of the town elders to create an oral history of the town. This history was omitted from the final this story, was omitted from the final compilation, which is archived at the Mark Twain Library. The Reading Historical Society, this great organization right here, isn't it?
You're going to join tonight.
Yeah. Was given a transcript of the tale told by one Jesse Treadwell, who spent the first years of his life in the Hull district of Reading. Jesse tells of a recently widowed woman named Mrs. Gorham down there, who had always kept herself well and was a pillar of the village. And she was always wearing her signature sapphire pendant on a chain around her neck that her husband had given.
What's the Hull area? You know?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you what. With the flooding of Hull being imminent for the new Saugatuck Reservoir,
There you go.
so that's where the Hull area is. It was at the top of the reservoir. Valley Forge was down, if you go down Valley Forge Road, maybe, in Weston, if you ever get as far as Weston. Have you heard of Weston? Well, it's down there. So Valley Forge was down way low where they moved, never mind, you don't need to. Read Village of the Dams, in fact. But anyway, I'll start again from here. Jesse tells of a recently widowed woman named Mrs. Gorham, who had always kept herself well and was a pillar of the village, her signature sapphire pendant on a chain around her neck. It was a gift of her husband. One of her dearest possessions. With the flooding of Hull being imminent for the new Saugatuck Reservoir, the villagers not being able to fight the water company lawyers, which is the God's honest truth, Mrs. Hull was the last person to stand in defiance of the inevitable. She chained and locked herself to the hook in the chimney of their home, which had been burned in advance of the flooding. Jesse's father tried to talk sense to her, but she was crouched in the fireplace with a shotgun, letting no one near, not mind to hear anything from anybody. Her sapphire pendant glowing from under a brow grown dark with woe. He doesn't know how the situation played out, but the reservoir was flooded in 1941. Because Jesse and his father hightailed it out of there, because, I mean, who doesn't run from a shotgun? A few years later, attracted by a strange glow from the small island that was the top of Hull Hill, which you can see the island when you drive by the reservoir if you ever go to Weston for any reason. I don't know why you go, but young Jesse and his friend Billy Dayton took a nighttime canoe trip out from the Glen, the farmhouse on the Glen, where the Treadwells ended up living before the Reeses bought the place, in fact, if you know them. Maybe some of you know them here. So they took a nighttime canoe trip out from the Glen to see if maybe it were some kind of hydraulic company machinery. You know how curious boys can be? Boating and swimming had been banned on the reservoir as a series of accidental drownings and a boat disappearance had raised the alarm of the locals. As they approached the island, the canoe was enveloped in a dark cloud, and a sapphire glow rose out of the lake and overturned the craft. The boys were thrown from the boat, and Jesse swears he was being pulled under by the widow Gorham, clutching with bony fingers at his legs, pulling him into the depths while her sapphire brooch glowed in the dark. He thought he was a goner, and all of a sudden he's pulled out, yanked by the shoulders, back into the canoe by Billy. Billy had saved his life. Now, I have friends on the Glen that have seen this sapphire glow at times and heard the shrieking from across the river. Have any of you?
Your feet shuffle among the broken branches and down leaves of that fabled strip of land near the Reading Road. Have you ever ventured into the woods off of Dayton Road? At your own risk, of course, if you're sold. How many whose houses branch off from the Dayton Road have come in the night to look up their stairs to see a child in early 19th century clothing, crinolines and cotton, staring back from her from the top landing. Visible but not visible. Eyes but no eyes, staring back. How many of you would dare to walk the Dayton Road at midnight to see children running through the woods? Again, seen but not seen. Eyes but no eyes. Laughing and playing. Running through the woods as if there are no trees there. The trees had been long ago cleared for their father's land to farm on. Come the 1600s, early 1700s. There was nothing for them to run into. But yet they still run to this day, seemingly through the trees, playing with their hoops and sticks. How many of you have ever stayed on a house on Dayton Road and heard children playing outside your window at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, while the dog, greatly disturbed, barks out the window at nothing? Such are the houses and the lives on Dayton Road. Graves long since powdered into dust. Crude wooden crosses and crude wooden slates long since disintegrated away. Yet the spirits, the souls remain. Where? When? At midnight.